Wonderful. Okay, so hi everybody again, and welcome to today's session. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Femke Nijsse, and she's going to be talking about how to calmly edit in controversial areas. Femke is an experienced editor who's worked on a range of tricky and sometimes controversial topics, from climate change and net zero to contested illnesses. She's helped several of these articles make it through good article and featured article processes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just now. And I'm going to hand over to Femke. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and really exciting to see so many people here today. So my pronouns she, her. And I'll be talking both about how to edit in these controversial articles without getting into conflict and what to do when you are in conflict. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions, just raise your hand. I think if I'm sharing, I should still be able to see raised hands. Otherwise, just say something for me to notice. Yeah, let's get started. So, how to edit in controversial areas. There's a lot of them on Wikipedia. Some of them are these very, very hot button topics where you get edits every couple of seconds, and some of these are more akin to frozen conflicts where it's really difficult to get changes through, but the space of editing is quite slow. I have more experience in the second type of articles than in the really hot button articles. So maybe some of these tips and tricks might not work as well in the articles where you have hundreds of editors trying to do things in a week. But I think most of these tips do work in these situations as well. So two parts, how to avoid conflict and write great articles, and what to do when there is conflict. I have these 6 things that I usually try to do to prevent conflict. So first, create a good impression, set a common goal with everybody who's active on the talk page, do your research, really, really important to know what you're talking about, compromise really early and fast, be kinder to those you disagree with than those you agree with, and respect people's time. Very basics. Never edit war. It's gonna get you blocked. It's gonna get frustrating for everybody. Just don't do it. There's never need to edit war. If you follow the right procedures, you should be able to get a consensus for a stable text. At a very minimum, follow, bold, revert, discuss, which works if your article is moderately controversial well enough. The more controversial the statement you're editing, the less that is good advice. So there's other forms of editing that are bold, discuss, revert, or discuss first. So for those unaware of these abbreviations, because I saw there's a couple of people not active on English Wikipedia, the bold, revert, discuss cycle means that whenever you want to change something in the article, you just boldly do it. You don't discuss first, you first make the edit. You wait till it sticks. And somebody might revert. And when somebody else reverts, it's on you to start a discussion. There are other ways to go about this. So for instance, if somebody else makes a bold edit, instead of reverting, which can be seen as a bit aggressive, you can first start a discussion and see whether there's a compromise available, or whether other people agree with you that it's not a great change. So you do a bold edit, you discuss, and then when it's clear from the discussion that there's not a lot of support for that, you revert. Or even discuss first. If it's about the first sentence and or about a really controversial bit, it's likely that there's going to be reversions, so you want to avoid that by discussing first on the talk page. With those basics all set, the first thing you want to do when you edit a controversial article is be boring. create a good first impression. In these kind of articles, a lot of the editors will be primed, will be thinking about other editors as trying to put non-neutral edits in. So even normally the assumption is that people assume good faith, but people are more skeptical when it's a controversial article. They will still assume good faith, but they will also keep in mind that there might not be good faith behind an edit. So given that, you need to create a good first impression. There's loads of different ways you can do that. You want to show you care about article quality more generally rather than about what the article says. So start with updating statistics. Start with noming, like adding links, formatting citations, providing alt tags, make it more accessible, make it easier to read, make it prettier. And copy editing, and only if you're good at that, because copy editing itself can be controversial. So if you're like me, not a native speaker, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't touch copy editing because I thought that there was too much of a risk for it to not work. Now that's one of the tools I use to create a good impression. The second thing, once people are used to you making a couple of edits to the article, is to set a common goal. If you're keen on these kind of processes. So the lovely thing here is that you try to create a group of editors that work together rather than you versus the rest. And the different goals that you can get, one common one is to try and get listed as a good article, or sometimes even a featured article. And I think featured article process is usually not worth it, except for controversial articles where it's really important that we get it right, and we get it right by working together with a large number of people. Setting this common goal has a couple of effects. So for both these criteria, neutrality is part of it. So if people say, yeah, I'm happy to work towards getting this listed as a good article, they implicitly say, yeah, I'm keen on making this article very neutral, and I'm keen on not pushing a certain point of view. Another part of these criteria is stability. So again, people will implicitly agree that to not edit war, because that's part of the criteria. And if we see this as a common goal, then people agree to behave. For super controversial articles, some people might resist setting the goal at GA because they think it's going to be more faff than it's worth. And they're really afraid of if you include more editors in the process, that it's only going to be more tough to improve the article. So in these kind of cases, you might say if you want to go to B, so B, of course, has this a lot of the same criteria. Neutrality and stability are criteria for B, if I'm not mistaken. And if people resist that, that might be a good second goal to go for. That fear of controversial articles leading to controversial good article processes. So for those unfamiliar with it, when you nominate an article to be a good article, what happens is that another editor will pick it up and review it. There's a fear that that might be very tense. My experience so far is that that rarely happens. That it sometimes happens, but whether a GA review is tense, met also, it really depends on who picks up. And a lot of articles that are themselves very boring can lead to a very tense GA review, whereas a lot of controversial articles are completely fine. I don't think I have ever had a very controversial GA review where there were tensions, and I had to make sure that these tensions were relieved before we got through the process. So I think it's a fear that's not really borne out by the realities of the GA process. The next step, do your research. Again, you really want to create good impressions. And normally it's fine to be human and make mistakes. And of course, in controversial articles, we're still human, but making mistakes will be considered, could be considered as, for instance, partisan pushing, that you're trying to push your point of view onto the article, and people don't have patience for that. So make sure that before you start suggesting really big topics, really big changes to the article, you've done your research. When something is controversial, sources are more likely to disagree with each other. So if you just rely on a single source, you might put errors in the article, or you might make a minority point of view a majority, or sound like the only point of view. So you want to read a bit more widely before you start making major changes to the article. And you want to rely on top quality sourcing. So if it's possible, use academic sources, use books, use papers. Review papers are usually the best ones to rely on, because they try to give a fair overview of the topic rather than argue a certain point. Or when you don't have academic sources, look at the best, the highest quality newspapers. Do they have long reads and explanations about the topic, rather than trying to get it from loads of small parts. Overview topics, overview sources are the most important, because a big question in these controversial articles is something called the due weight. How much attention should you give to different point of views? And overview articles, overview books usually have to answer the exact the same question. One example around climate change is, how much attention do we give to climate denial? Should we put a lot of words in sort of stopping to indicating why it's a problem, or should it be just a couple of sentences? And to answer that question, what we do, we take these overview sources. We take, for instance, the 10 best sources, 5 best sources, and we're just doing tallying, calculating what percentage of their words is dedicated to this topic and what's the average. And we're aiming for the same percentage. So maybe 5% of their words is dedicated to climate denial, then we do the same. So top quality sourcing and rely on overview sources to make sure to know how much weight to give and how much time, how many words to give to each different opinion or each different topic. And know what you're talking about. Making a mistake can be perceived as being biased. I already looked at this a bit. So one of the ways to do this is doing a systemic review. Maybe not what we do in academia with really doing this very formally, but doing it transparently so that people trust what you have done in your research. Sometimes when anything is very controversial, I first will suggest a methodology. So I say, okay, we want to figure out what the average, how many people die on average from air pollution. And this might be controversial. So what I say, okay, I will use these search terms on Google. I will detail how many exactly for each source what they say the number of deaths is from air pollution. And then I will propose a sentence that gives due weights to the different opinions in proportion to what the sources say. This helps because once you've said, this is my methodology, this is how I answer the questions in the most fair way, people are on board. People will typically, if you do this systematically, be very happy, and they're very happy that you don't suggest any methodology that might have some cherry picking in it. So cherry picking is when you select those sources because they agree with you, rather than that you read all the sources available and check what the average or typical disagreements are. Then show your research concisely and transparently while proposing the new text. Sometimes if it's slightly less controversial, normally probably you can do this in one go. Only if it's really controversial do you want to split it into 2 steps. An example here, there is this article called myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome. It used to be called chronic fatigue syndrome, and it's that name used to be very contested because it applies that people are just tired, and everybody is tired. So it feels like a name that underplays the severity of this illness. And over time, more and more medical institutions had stopped using the old term chronic fatigue syndrome and used ME/CFS instead. So what I did is I proposed a methodology. I said I want to assess all the guidelines that came out in the last 5 years and assess all review articles in the last 5 years. The rename had been suggested a couple of times before, so I made sure to go over all these previous discussions and tackle it much more systematically. People agreed with the methodology, so I did this research, and only at the end of that research did I propose a rename of the article. And where it was very 50-50 in the previous rename discussion 9 months earlier, this time with the methodology, there was a very clear consensus. Almost everybody agreed with the rename. So doing the research really, really helps, and doing the research in a fair and transparent way really helps with finally unfreezing these conflicts. Then compromise early and fast. So getting new text in the article requires a bit of momentum. If you have a very chaotic discussion with loads and loads of people, what you want to do is create that momentum, and you do that by compromising very early and very fast. So sometimes it's really literally the first person who disagrees with you and has a concrete reason why. Try to compromise with them, get them on board. And here you want to act fast before opposes pile on and your proposal doesn't make it. Next step, be kind to those you disagree with. Most of the time you want to focus on content, not on people. You don't really want to talk about how they edit, you want to talk about what they propose. But there are a couple of exceptions, and one is to give compliments. And the best compliments are those that are very specific. Not only, hey, thanks for helping with the article, but thanks for finding that source. That source changed my opinion in that and that way. Really helpful. Give barn stars as well. So barn stars are one standard way of thanking people on Wikipedia. The policy on Wikipedia is to be civil. That is a very low bar. It basically means don't attack people, don't be mean to people. Try to do everything rationality. But we want to go a bit higher, especially with people you disagree with. You want to be kind. Don't spend too many words on it, don't overdo it, but you want to be kind and make sure that they know they are appreciated, even if they disagree with you. Finally, very important, respect people's time. Read all discussion. Make sure you don't litigate. If there is no chance that your proposal is going to make it because it's been proposed before and there was a very unanimous opinion against it, don't do it again. Keep your messages concise and to the point and understandable. The more you talk, the more you reply, it becomes annoying. You want to make sure that as many voices as possible are being heard in a discussion, and that means that you shouldn't post wall of text and you should limit the amount of time you reply. Don't repeat yourself, for instance. Keep your points understandable. When you read all those high quality, reliable sources and they're academic sources, they're going to use a lot of words that people might not understand. And there is a risk that you're going to copy what they say. making it really difficult for more people to join the discussion. So if you are in a technical article, it basically excludes everybody that isn't very well versed. And you want to include as many voices as possible to have a very clear consensus about the direction. So make sure you don't use really difficult words. Sometimes it's useful to summarize other people's words. If you want to double check you've understood them before you, for instance, propose a compromise. And only escalate where needed. I don't often have to escalate. I think I can count the numbers of time I've had to escalate on two hands, despite having like 25,000 edits, because it's a waste of time. It's not fun. Sometimes it's needed, but try to prevent it. I think this is a good time to, if there's any questions about that before we go to what we do when there are conflicts.
Femke, so I'll just there's been some dropping of links and things in the chat, and just some little comments as we go along. So I'll just come back to some of them. Karma had been asking, is it important to have a good standing first within the community before you kind of go on to edit on more controversial articles? We had a couple of answers within the text, but within the chat, but it would just be good to get your feeling on that.
Yes, being in good standing in the community is absolutely very useful when you do those kind of things. One example is when I was a relatively new editor, I did some edits to the article about India. And I did the good first impression thing where I started copy editing and started to do like loads of tiny improvements in formatting. And there was somebody else that was doing partisan edits at the same time, and the person reviewing the article got really angry at both of us for disrupting his featured article. And the reason that that didn't escalate was that somebody else was saying, hey, she knows what she's talking about in terms of featured article criteria because she's done this before. So don't confuse the two. And that ended the conflict. So that really helped, and other people being able to stand up for you. If you come from a blog, for instance, it's always the best course of action to first try and get a very non-controversial article to GA. Writing good articles is one of these fantastic ways to gain standing again in the community. If you can show that you can edit productively outside of controversial edit areas, that really helps.
Great, thank you. And some of the other questions had been around, how do we set a common goal? Is that always going to be on a talk page, like the talk page of the article, or would there be any other locations that we would do that in?
There's two places. One is the talk page of the article. The other one probably is the talk page of a wiki project where you can see if other people can join in your goal. Most of the time, people are very happy when you do most of the work and they can do a bit of helping. So don't ask people to write half of the article when you set a common goal. You just want to make sure that they double check and that you can ask questions to sense check if something is neutral.
Great, thank you. Lovely comment actually in from Owen, agreeing with what you said before, just I think chiming in on the article you were talking about before. Side note, that my article is an attitude to avoid. It's really good to come to peace with the idea that when you create an article, other people will add to it, sometimes in ways you don't like. That's just part of the collaborative editing process on Wikipedia. And I'd say that's because I say to a lot of new editors, wiki is never finished.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a very good attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
So, if you've done everything you can, and still there are issues, people are shouting at you, people are disagreeing with you and don't want to compromise, and so forth and so forth, there are loads of different processes to navigate conflict. I'll talk about 6 of them. the hierarchy of dispute resolution, third opinions, wiki projects and notice boards, requests for comments, the arbitration, enforcement, and administrator notice boards, and arbitration. Typically, when possible, you want to go via the content dispute routes. And that is if there's minor issues with somebody's conduct and you think you can get away with focusing on content, then you still should try that so that you don't ruin your relationship in the past. Conduct issues, if you report that, sometimes that's really irreversible and makes it more difficult to work with that person in the future. So content disputes, the first one to use is a third opinion. If that doesn't work, request for comment, which is a wider asking more people. Then, or at the same time, wiki projects and notice boards, such as the surrounding neutral point of view. And the last one, and I would typically advise to avoid this one, is a dispute resolution notice board. I'm not going to talk more about it later, but the reason why I would avoid it is that it's a really drawn out process, and quite a lot of the time it doesn't really lead to people working together more efficiently. I would say the most important thing on Wikipedia is to respect other people's time, and the way that notice board is set up doesn't really do that. If there's conduct issues, first start a dialogue on user talk. So if somebody is, for instance, quite aggressive, just a kind message saying, hey, that didn't feel good. Would you be willing to strike that comment? Would you be willing to no, that sounds a bit rushed. Would you be willing to do work slightly differently together? If that doesn't work, there are a couple of places to escalate. So one is the administrator's notice board or the arbitration enforcement. And if you've tried to resolve a conflict many, many times in these two notice boards, you can go and ask arbitrators. I've never commented on any arbitration case. Hopefully that shows that all the other dispute resolution areas are working if you use them right. But that's typically something to avoid because it's painful for everybody involved. So start with third opinions. The fastest way to get feedback. The rules is that if two users disagree, you ask the opinion of a third user. And it's not binding. You can always, if they give us poor advice or a poor opinion, not well thought out, you don't have to do it. But quite often the two users do agree to let that set on it. To start this process, you have to write a neutral description, a one-liner of the disagreement on the third opinion notice board. You don't sign it, so the person that looks at it doesn't know which of the two editors opened this avenue, and you invite them to the talk page of the article. If there's been a very long discussion, and you must have at least some discussion, you must have tried to compromise before, then you can summarize first for the third editor so that they don't have to read a wall of text. The listing is only for 1 week. If there's nobody answering within a week, then it will get deleted. So typically around 70% of requests get answered, and you can make it more likely to get an answer by helping other people to resolve their third opinions. Great method, resolves a lot of the questions and is very lightweight, so you don't waste a lot of editing time on it. Okay, the next one is wiki projects. If your article falls in a wiki project that's still quite active, then that's a fantastic way to get more people involved. This is the first route, for instance, if it's quite a technical thing that you're disagreeing with, and people in third opinion on that notice board might not know the answer because they're not experts. Wiki projects do have these experts. So here you can also just ask informally, hey, could I have a third opinion? Hey, we're disagreeing about X and Y. What kind of sources could, for instance, help us answer this question? The other area that might be useful are notice boards. So there's 4 of them that can help with controversial articles. You've got the neutral point of view notice board, the fringe theories, reliable sources, and original research. And these notice boards, you can either ask people to come to the article, or you can open a discussion there for it to be the answers there. The reliable sources notice board has a quirky rule in the sense that you're not really allowed to ask, or you're not supposed to ask, whether a certain source is reliable. Because a lot of sources can be reliable for some things, but unreliable for something else. For instance, if you have an academic paper that talks about a certain detail of medical practice, and they have some offhand comment about something completely different, a different disease, then they're not expert on that other disease. So it's not really reliable for any statement about the other disease, even though it's maybe a perfect source for what it's actually about. So always ask, is source A reliable for X? They're, yeah, very well watched. So quite often you do get response on these notice boards. Then request for comments. So a request for comments allows you to ask the entire community, what do you think? The reason it's quite low on this list is that it requires quite a lot of editor time. It's a perfectly fine mechanism to gain consensus, but and it often leads to a final answer. Not always. It can be close to no consensus, but it's very time intensive. You can easily have 10 people that are involved in a conflict, or for big requests for comments, hundreds. Before you do that, you have to follow the steps of RFC before, which means you have to agree on a question and see if you can resolve it without the request for comment. And keep it simple, stupid. So make sure that it's very easy for people to be involved in the question. That's conduct. That's content, conduct. So imagine you are a situation where people are breaking the rules. And they can break the rules in a lot of different ways. They can break the rules by always pushing a certain point of view. They might misrepresent what sources say, or they might not be able to read sources at an appropriate level, for instance, because they don't have the reading ability, they're not technically schooled, they might not speak English as their first language. And yeah, you can't really manage to get compromises with them. So there's a couple of options that you can go for. One is A&E, A&I. I always use sort of a mix between Dutch and English in the abbreviation. So that one is the standard one, and for non-controversial areas, you always go there. There's a second option for controversial areas, and that's arbitration enforcement. And my advice is always pick that one if your topic is one of these contentious topics. And contentious topics, basically, arbitrators in some time long past have said, this is a really difficult topic to edit. We're giving admins more tools to combat misconduct. The lovely thing about choosing that notice board is that it's very well structured, and admins aren't afraid there to take action. There's a couple of rules in the next slide. I'll tell you about how you can use that notice board. But in either, you keep your report concise and precise. Give diffs. So make very clear, give a URL about the different things they've done wrong and what policy or guideline they're breaking. Also make sure that when you've given them a warning, which of the diffs came before the warning and which came after the warning. And be on your best behavior before going to admins, because admins are volunteers. They might have a lot of time. They might be tired when looking at it. So if both of you are swearing, or if both of you are being very unkind to each other, there is a risk that it's going to boomerang, so that not only the other person might get a sanction, but you get a sanction as well. Make life easy for admins is my advice, because I'm lazy. Make sure that it's very clear, if they look into it, that there is one person to blame for misconduct. So if you want to go to the arbitration enforcement route, so this is for topics the arbitration committee has deemed contentious. The other editor, before you're allowed to go there, must be aware of the stricter adherence to rules. So there's a lot of different ways to make them aware. For instance, if they've before commented on another report, they are aware. But the standard way is to give them an introductory notice. And you have to have done this, and their misconduct, at least part of it, must have been after you've given this notice before you can go to AE. But it can feel inflammatory, that notice. So avoid giving that notice till you are pretty sure that you're going to end up at AE. So if you think that there are content resolution methods that might work, you might avoid giving them this notice, or hope that somebody uninvolved in the conflict gives them the notice. There's word limits at AE, keep to them. And if you need more words or more diffs to show the misconduct, first request an extension before you write too much. But typically keep to them. The shorter it is, the more likely you'll get a rapid resolution. You're only allowed to report one person per report, and you have to keep your answers to your own section. So normally on Wikipedia, you write something and then one level indented out is a reply and so forth. Here, that's not allowed. You can only write in your own section. You can't write in the admin section or in the other person's section. It's calmer than response to get a response there than A&E because of these weird rules. It can be a bit slower, but still it's less faff. It's usually the calmer way to get help. And then arbitration, I'll be very short about that. It's an avenue of last resort. You need to show that multiple reports at A&E or AE have not resolved the issue, and it's also the place if admins abuse their permissions. It has similar rules around word limits and not being able to comment in other people's sections as arbitration enforcement, but it's even slower. It can take months for something to be resolved there. So, summary. Be nice, not merely civil. Set common goals. Do your research and respect other people's time. If that doesn't work, use the lightest dispute resolution method that's appropriate. Third opinions or wiki projects, and if possible, escalate to AE. Otherwise, A&I. Arbitration is only an option of last resort. Most of the time, it will have nothing to do with arbitration. More questions?
Been looking through the chat. Thank you so much, Femke. We've been looking through the chat. A couple of folks saying, yeah, wiki projects really helpful, particularly when dealing with biographies of living people. I was particularly fond of the framing around reliable sources. It's not just if a reliable source is overall reliable, it's reliable for a particular topic. I'm keeping that one. That's lovely framing. And much agreement on just making, if you do need to go to admins, just making it easy for them, because everybody's a volunteer, and as you say, time is our most precious resource. Yeah, do folks have any questions or anything? Would people like to unmute if you have any additional questions?
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to say thank you for putting together like a really straightforward, coherent, easy to understand presentation. I think this would be really useful for people to look back to as well as those of us here. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. There's some brilliant tips in there. I think that some of these processes can feel quite scary and quite overwhelming. So to have them all laid out like that is just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Are there any other tips people have when they work in controversial areas?
Ooh.
I
Ooh,
think
yeah.
yes, actually, I'd say like along with my slightly like be zen about things comment earlier around like people will mess with your content and that's fine. Like just accept that as a rule of the universe. Another is like try and remember that everyone is working with good intentions for what they think is the best thing to do. Like nobody, almost nobody, there are some vandals, but very, very few people are deliberately trying to make things worse, bad. Most people are trying to do the best they can to create the best encyclopedia we can together. And just because they have a different perspective on something doesn't mean they're a bad person. Like they're just trying to help too. You just disagree about what the best way of doing that is.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And there's one other thought I had around that, and that is if people misrepresent sources, you can usually get them banned on arbitration enforcement or A&E. People don't have a lot of patience for that in controversial areas, but it might not always wise to escalate. In the climate change article, I had two people that didn't always represent their sources correctly. I think they did it with good intentions. It was just a matter of they weren't careful enough and their reading may have been a bit yeah, they had both had a bias, but the bias was different. They had the opposing bias. One wanted to make the climate change article more of an activist article, and the other one had a mildly skeptical view of climate change. And the lovely thing is that they checked each other very, very thoroughly. And by having both of them still part of the conversation, we managed to get really good compromises as long as we double checked. So don't don't escalate if you don't have to. If this gets too burdensome, if somebody continues to misrepresent it and there's only one other person and you don't have a good balance, you can relatively easily get admins to topic ban a person if they do this over and over again. But do it tactically.
Well, that's a really good tip. Grand. Any more questions or any other comments from our audience today?
I find it interesting to see somebody say they actively avoid controversial areas. One of the reasons I wanted to give the presentation today is that a lot of people do that. And I think that Wikipedia strength is in how we display the controversial areas, but it also is so important for our reputation. And it's not as scary as you think. Most of the time when you edit in controversial areas, especially if it's not an article like Donald Trump, but just something mildly controversial, not India, Pakistan, and not Israel, Palestine. If you avoid those three big topics and go to one level down, most of the time it's not that different from normal editing. And it's very important we get things right there. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, it can seem really scary, but yeah, so it's lovely to hear that. Thank you. I think there was a quote from Catherine Ma at a Wikimedia UK event in London a few years ago, and she'd said that Wikipedia, I don't know if this was directly from her, if she'd taken it from somewhere else, but the line has always stayed with me, which is that Wikipedia is the one place on the internet where you go for an argument and become more reasonable over time. Which
There
I
is research on this. So we see that a lot of new editors come into Wikipedia with very strong opinions. And then if you track their comments over the years, they become more moderate. And I've seen that in action quite a lot of times where you've got a new editor, you intensely mentor them, and they become such an asset to the team because they learn how to write neutrally and what kind of sources give you a neutral point of view. There's always going to be, if they come in with very strong opinions, you always see some of that shine through, but over time it gets less.
Yeah, fascinating. It really is fascinating, and I think it's, yeah, absolutely is one of Wikipedia's strengths. Brilliant, thank you so much. But yeah, if there are no more questions or comments, I will just ask if everybody would join me in a virtual round of applause for Femke today. Thank you so much. I have put in the chat just a wee link there if you'd like to hear more from Wikimedia UK and other events like this. Please do drop your details into the Google form there, and we'll get you added to the appropriate mailing lists. But yeah, once again, Femke, thank you so much. Thank you for today. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I hope everybody has a lovely rest of your Saturday, and thank you so much for joining us. The recording will be uploaded to our YouTube and then up to the Sandbox Community Sandbox Sessions page on our website. But I will let everybody that's that signed up for the event today know when that has gone live. But yeah, once again, thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your day, folks. Cheers. Happy editing.
Happy editing, everyone.